Good historical day to everyone. Today, we're going to discuss one of the most controversial issues in the Philippine history, the first cry of Pugad Lawin or Balintawak. Despite the fact that up to this day, we are still celebrating and commemorating this event as National Heroes Day, many of us doesn't know the behind story of this event, which created conflicting ideas in the history because of such multiple accounts as to where did Andres Bonifacio and his fellow Katipuneros reap their cédulas and shouted, "Long live Philippine independence!" So, today, we are going to do a further discussion about this controversy.
What do we mean by first cry in Philippine history? The first cry or unang sigaw in Filipino does not literally mean a cry or shout. It is translated from the Spanish term El Grito de Rebelión or El Grito for short, which means cry for rebellion. Thus, El Grito de Rebelión strictly refers to a decision or a call to revolt, and it does not necessarily mean shouting, unlike the Filipino term sigaw. The first cry is generally signified as the first call for rebellion led by the supreme leader of the KKK, Andres Bonifacio. It is marked as the beginning of the Philippine Revolution or seeking of independence for the Philippines from Spanish colonial rule with the use of violence and arms. It is also the initial move of the Filipinos to fight against the Spanish regime, and its historic significance as consists of the realization that Filipinos or Filipino people had finally realized the lasting value of freedom and independence and the need to fight in order to prove themselves worthy to be called a truly free people.
So, how did the first cry started? Just a brief historical background. When Jose Rizal was exiled in Dapitan, Andres Bonifacio and his colleagues realized that the advocacy of Jose Rizal to gain independence through his propaganda movement will no longer work to gain freedom from the Spaniards. So, with the initiative of Bonifacio and his colleagues, they established a Philippine Revolutionary Organization, the Kataas-Taasan Kagalang-galangang Katipunan ng mga Anak ng Bayan, commonly known as Katipunan or KKK, on July 7, 1892 with its primary goal to gain independence from Spain through a revolution. The Katipunan was a secret organization until it was discovered in August 19, 1896 after 4 years. And there was actually different versions in the history on how the organization was discovered by the Spaniards. May nagsasabing maroon daw espiya sa loob ng Katipunan. The other version was from Teodoro Patiño, who has a secret relationship daw with the Katipunan member. And because of his fear na mapahamak ang karelasyon niya, yung naging way niya para protektahan niya and ma-stop yung revolution is to tell it to the Spaniards. And another version was also from the diary of Mariano Alvarez, the president of Magdiwang Group ng Katipunan. But walang naging patunay kung aling version ang masasabing totoo o most accurate. However, the time when the Spaniards already knew about the Katipunan, yung ginawa nila is they make a movement. Pinaghuhuli nila yung mga inaakala nilang miyembro ng Katipunan, pinapatay nila lahat. So when Bonifacio learned about this, he decided to call a meeting together with the other Katipunan officials. So he told them na kailangan na nilang simulan ang revolution bago pa nila maubos ang mga Katipunan members. So most of the officials disagreed sa statement ni Andres Bonifacio dahil masyado pa daw maaga. Gayunpaman, during that day of meeting, Bonifacio still declared na sisimulan na nila ang revolution. So on the same day of meeting, they started the first cry ang pagpupunit ng sedula and pagsisigaw ng kalayaan as a confirmation of the start of the Philippine Revolution.
What are the significant events in the first cry? The first cry is not just a cry for rebellion. There are two important events that had happened in the first cry. We have here the first event, the tearing of community tax certificates or cedula. We all know that during the Spanish administration, cedula is very important to all Filipinos since it is a mandatory identification card during the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines. However, during the first cry, the members of Katipunan led by Andres Bonifacio gathered to tear up their cedulas. The tearing of community tax certificates or cedulas personales symbolizes the eventual cessation of Katipuneros' loyalty to Spanish government. Along with the tearing of community tax certificates was accompanied by patriotic shouts, "Viva la Independencia Filipina" or "Long live Philippine Independence," which is another essential event during the first cry. The shouts were meant to express the goal of their secret organization. These two important events showed the real essence of the first cry, which is to serve as the signal of confirmation for the Katipuneros' total defiance to their allegiance to Spain. And it is also the gesticulation for the official beginning of the Philippine Revolution against the Spaniards.
Additional information. First, the revolt later grew in strength and spread to 8 provinces including Manila, Bulacan, Cavite, Pampanga, Tarlac, Laguna, Batangas, and Nueva Ecija. Second, it also represented by the 8 rays of the sun in the present Filipino flag.
When and where did it happen? It is very surprising that there are various versions on the dates and venues for the first cry. The first cry venue and date is the most debatable event in the Philippine history since primary sources have multiple accounts as to where and when was the event happen. This controversy remains unsolved in the Philippine history because of different accounts and the ambiguity of place names in these accounts. The exact date and place of the cry is disputed. However, we're going to take a look at the different eyewitnesses of the first-hand information who have written various accounts on the date and venue of the cry, and we'll take into consideration to them.
Dr. Pio Valenzuela, The Cry of Pugad Lawin. He is a Filipino physician and revolutionary leader. At the age of 23, he joined the Katipunan and became one of the officials. He was also a friend of Andres Bonifacio. He was also present during the meeting before the actual first cry happened. There were 2 versions presented by him. In his first version, he told that the cry was in Balintawak on Wednesday of August 26, 1896. Later, he wrote his memoirs of the revolution and claimed that the cry took place at Pugad Lawin on August 23, 1896. General Santiago Virata Alvarez, The Cry of Bahay Toro. He was a well-known Katipunero from Cavite and also known as Kidlat ng Apoy. He was already a Delegado General of the Provincial Council of the Katipunan in Cavite. He became the Captain General and later Commander-in-Chief of the Magdiwang forces and valiantly fought the Spaniards from 1896 to 1897. He was a relative of Gregoria de Jesus, the wife of Andres Bonifacio. In his account, the first cry happened on August 24, 1896 at Bahay Toro, Quezon City.
General Guillermo Masangkay is a friend and advisor of Andres Bonifacio. He was one of the first members of the Katipunan, which was designated to build the KKK in Cavite. He played a role in the Filipino-American War as a revolutionary general. There were also 2 versions presented by him. Firstly, He dated the first cry on his interview in the Sunday Tribune First Decade of American Occupation on August 26, 1896. Secondly, he dated it on August 23, 1896, on his interview published in the newspaper Bagong Buhay, similar to the assertion of Dr. Pio Valenzuela. But then again, it was changed back by his granddaughter Soledad Buller Borromeo. Cited sources, including Masangkay's papers, that the original date was August 26, 1896. Gregoria de Jesus was the Lakambini of the Katipunan and the wife of Andres Bonifacio. She was also known by her nickname Oryang, who became the founder and vice president of the women's chapter of the Katipunan. She was the custodian of the documents and seal of the Katipunan. In her account, the first cry happened near Caloocan on August 25, 1896.
Now let's proceed to the arguments. First cry, as to what we've said in the previous discussion, remains controversial in the Philippine history because of the multiple accounts as to where and when did it happen. But among the controversy, the cry of Balintawak or Pugad Lawin is the most famous and debatable issue because of the reputation of the historians who wrote it according to their sources. The argument is the first cry happened in Pugad Lawin. Dr. Pio Valenzuela was the only eyewitness who accounted that the cry happened in Pugad Lawin. He is a Filipino physician and revolutionary leader, a member of the Katipunan, and also an acquaintance of Andres Bonifacio.
But more than that, some people believe this argument because of the big influence of Teodoro Agoncillo, who is a preeminent Filipino historian of the 20th century. He was one of those historians who earned the nationalist point of view of Filipino history. According to Teodoro Agoncillo in his book Revolt of the Masses 1956, it was at Pugad Lawin, the house, storehouse, and yard of Juan Ramos, son of Melchor Aquino, where over 1,000 members of the Katipunan met and carried out considerable debate and discussion on August 23, 1896. The discussion was on whether or not the revolution against the Spanish government should be started on August 29, 1896. After the tumultuous meeting, many of those present tore their cedula certificates and shouted, "Long live the Philippines! Long live the Philippines!"
So in here, since Teodoro Agoncillo was considered as one of the most important historians of our time, and also because of his new brand of historiography that did away with conventional ways of writing the history of the Philippines through the eyes of the foreigners and introduced a more Filipino-centric style and also have transcended to the realm of classic literature, Agoncillo used his considerable influence and campaigned to change the date and venue of the first cry to Pugad Lawin, August 23, 1896.
In 1963, the National Heroes Commission, a forerunner of the National Historical Institute, or NHI, without formal consultations of the President Macapagal. Consequently, the President ordered that the Cry of Balintawak shall be called Cry of Pugad Lawin, and it should be celebrated on August 23 instead of August 26.
Counter-argument. The first cry happened in Balintawak. There are actually 5 accounts of versions from different persons in the Philippine history which are related to the cry of Balintawak, and some of them has been discussed in the authors. These accounts show that the first cry happened in Caloocan, Kangkung, Quezon City, Bahay ni Toro, and Pugad Lawin. According to Dr. Milagros Guerrero, Ramon, Villegas, and Emmanuel Encarnacion, stated that all these mentioned places are part of Balintawak, and Quezon City during the Spanish regime is still not an existing place. And if all accounts were combined and scrutinized, Bonifacio and the Katipunan were constantly moving from one place to another in order to avoid the Spaniards. Therefore, different meetings were held, and this is why many of the witnesses remembered various cries of Balintawak. An eyewitness named Guillermo Masangkay of the historic event and an advisor of Andres Bonifacio was also asked by Bonifacio for approval of turning the Katipunan into an association for the revolution. This proves his huge credibility on his account about the first cry.
Events according to Masangkay. Number 1. August 26, 1896. Meeting held in Balintawak at the house of Apolonio Samson. Among those who attended were Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Jacinto, and Aguedo del Rosario. Number 2. 9 a.m. August 26. Meeting was opened with Andres Bonifacio presiding and Emilio Jacinto acting as secretary. The purpose was to discuss when the uprising was to take place. Number 3. Andres Bonifacio argues with the other leaders about starting a revolt too early and leaves. Number 4. Andres Bonifacio, upon leaving the meeting, gave a fiery speech and the people shouted revolt. Number 5. After the speech, they all tear their cedulus, also known as tax certificate. Number 6. After the pledge and tearing of their cedulus, Andres Bonifacio returns to the session hall and informs the leaders of what took place outside. Number 7. Despite their differences, they all voted for revolution outside and the people shouted, "Long live the Philippine Republic." At 5 p.m., while the gathering at Balintawak were celebrating, guards up in the trees gave a warning that the Spaniards were coming. Andres Bonifacio then led them to prepare for the attack by the civil guards. In 1970, the historian Pedro A. Gagalonia pointed out the Cry of Pugad Lawin cannot be accepted as historically accurate. It lacks positive documentation and supporting evidence from the witness. The testimony of only one eyewitness, named Dr. Pio Valenzuela, is not enough to authenticate and verify the controversial issue. As compared to the accountants pointing Balintawak, many eyewitnesses presented like Lieutenant Olegario Diaz, who was a civil guard, which also corroborates the account of the historian Gregorio Zaide and Teodoro Calao, who also wrote in his 1925 book entitled The Filipino Revolution that the cry took place during the final week of August 1896 at Kangkong, Balintawak.
To conclude, if you are going to see the reason why this event becomes very controversial is that because the first-hand sources or the eyewitnesses have multiple accounts, kaya siya nagiging hot issue in the Philippine history which remain unsolved up to the present day. So if you are going to scrutinize it, kung ano nga ba talaga ang halaga ng paglilipat ng petsa at lugar na pinangyarihan ng unang sigaw, bakit ganoon na lamang kagusto ng mga authors or sources na ilipat ang petsa at lugar na pinangyarihan ng the first cry? Well, in my own point of view, it doesn't really make sense actually. It's not really important kung saan naganap ang pangyayaring ito because what matters the most is the essence of what Andres Bonifacio and the Katipunan have done for our country. Their decision to do a revolution and change the course of our history is the most important of all. Kaya kung titignan ninyo, hindi naman talaga mahalaga ang petsa o lugar. Because what matters the most is that we give significance or value to the contribution of our national heroes in order to begin a revolution for us to be able to achieve our Philippine independence.
The term cry, which means cry for rebellion, which marks as the beginning of the Philippine Revolution led by the supreme leader, Andres Bonifacio. There are two important events that happened in the first cry, We have here the first event, the tearing of community task certificates or cedula, which was accompanied by patriotic shouts, "Long live Philippine independence!" Dr. Pia Valenzuela counts the Cry of Pugad Lawin on August 23, 1896. General Santiago Virata Alvarez accounts the Cry of Bahay Toro on August 24, 1896. General Guillermo Masangkay accounts the Cry of Balintawak on August 26, 1896. Gregoria de Jesus accounts the first cry on August 25, 1896. Lastly, among the different versions of the first cry, the cry of a Balintawak or Pugad Lawin is the most famous and debatable because of the reputation of the historians who wrote it according to their sources. Did you know that after the death of Andres Bonifacio, his remnant remains unfound in the Philippine history?
Please don't forget to like, comment, share this video, and subscribe my channel for more video updates.